welcome to What the Bristol live show. Today we have the lovely Charlotte Booth here with us as a special member guest. So a big welcome to Charlotte, and I'm going to hand you over by sharing a little bit more of what you do, Charlotte.
Okay, thank you for inviting me on the show, which is all very exciting. Okay, so I run Popple Services, which is a copywriting, proofreading and editing business. But I'm a writing mentor as well, which is based on basically having a 20-odd year writing career where I've had 17 books published, all traditionally, and another 2 in the pipeline. So one's due out next year and then another the year after. So the writing mentoring is a side of my business that I want to build up a little bit, because writing books is something I'm very, very passionate about. And so all of this came from this very long career of writing. I spent a long time as an Egyptologist, so studying ancient Egypt, and that's what my PhD is in. I worked in Egypt for a bit, and I taught Egyptology and hieroglyphs and archaeology and all this kind of stuff. But the only way really to make any proper money in academia is by writing. So writing books, writing articles for magazines. You don't make a lot of money unless you're J.K. Rowling, but it's a way of bringing in the income, which is why I ended up, over that 20-odd year period, of actually churning out quite a lot of books. It was, at one point, it was about 1 a year that was being published. It slowed down a little bit now, but it became a little bit of a factory, a fun factory.
Love that. So obviously you have this huge passion for writing so many books. I honestly could probably just about read that many books at the moment. So writing them, please explain sort of, why you're so passionate about writing books, and kind of why you really encourage other people to write books.
It's quite a strange thing, because writing a book is something I always wanted to do. And I remember going back about 1 million years, I was sat in my psychology A-level class, really not concentrating on what I should have been concentrating on. And I made a kind of pact with myself that I would one day write a book that would change someone's life. And so I was, 17? And I don't know where that thought came from, but it was there. And it's like, yeah, that's actually what I really want to do. I want to write a book that people are going to read. And however it changes their life, it would be great if it could. Probably because I liked my psychology course textbook. I mean, I was a bit of a nerd, let's be honest. And then when I got my first book published, which was my undergraduate dissertation, and looking back, it was probably rubbish. But a publisher said, yeah, it's great, it's exactly what we want, and published it. And after that, it just became, I would say it's a passion, because if I was interested in something, and we all have this where you find something that really sparks your imagination and you think, I want to find out more about that. And it's really easy now. You go onto YouTube or whatever, and you can find out about anything at all. Since then, I've always had this thing that if I find out about stuff, and it takes me ages to find out about stuff, why don't I write it all down so other people don't have to take ages to find out about stuff? Wow, so yeah, that's kind of where it comes from, where if I'm doing all that research for fun, I might as well put it into a book of some sort. And then as I got more confident and publishers were then coming to me, or I was thinking about the publishers I'd like to work with, I was able to think of the books I wanted to read. So most of the books I've written were books that weren't available in any other format. Right. So if, for example, I've written a biography of a little known Egyptian king, and it's because I was fascinated by him and there were no books out there on him. So I wrote a book, and it took a while to get a publisher, because they're like, well, there's no other books, there's obviously not a market. And then once someone agreed, it was published, and I was very happy, and it was all good. And now there's a few more in English. There's 5 or 6 in English now, because the publishers are obviously seeing there is a book in English. So a lot of the books I've written, they're a little bit different from the main stream, but only because I'm writing the books I wanted to read. And that's why writing for me has been a fun experience. There have been times when publishers have asked me to write books and I just think I've got no interest in that topic, or I think there's too much out there already. So recently I was asked to write a book on Egyptian religion, and it's like, I can't add anything new to that because there's a million books out there already in every language. So for me, the fun of writing, because it's a massive commitment to write a book with time and energy and everything else, it has to be something you're excited about reading, and then that comes through when you're writing, that excitement and that passion.
Amazing, love that. And it goes on to my next sort of question with you. Obviously, we mentioned in the kind of little promo we sent out is, you know, bringing the fun into writing. So you've already touched base a little bit on, you know, being passionate about what you write about, and, you know, coming from what more of an approach of being able to, you know, write about something that you are interested in. What other ways can be a fun way of, you know, of writing and creating a book?
The most important thing to think of when you're writing a book is not kind of the end product, in the sense, I had a chat with somebody today who's like, I'm terrified of starting writing this book because I can't commit to writing a book. And so once you have that overwhelm of, I'm going to write a book of 70,000 words or 200 pages or whatever it is, you have that overwhelm of, this is a massive project. But I'm quite an obsessive planner. So during my mentoring program, the first quarter is all about planning, because if you know 100% what you want to put into your book in ridiculous detail, including case studies and what illustrations you can use, and you have all these ideas together, then you know what you're going to write at any particular time. And so it can always be fun. So if you're writing a book of, say, 70, 80,000 words or whatever, and there's going to be some boring things in there. There always is, like background stuff that perhaps isn't the most fascinating thing. But if you know, actually today I want to write about, I don't know, death and disease in ancient Egypt, that's what I'm going to do. And you know there's a section in your book that's 1,000 words on that particular topic. You write what you're inspired to write on that day. And then if the next day you haven't finished that, but you don't really feel like it, you'll be like, oh, it's okay. Today I'm going to write about crocodiles, because that's a different section of the book. So by planning ridiculously in ridiculous detail in advance, you can always write what you're inspired to write on that day, which might not be starting from the beginning of the book going through to the end.
Love that.
So
and I think it is that.
Sorry.
Go on.
So I was saying my writing approach is, you know, you get those books where you can dip in.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to read from page 1 through to page 200. You can just open at any page. And my writing approach is like that. And I try and encourage the authors who come through my program to think in this non-linear way. And then that keeps the excitement in, because if you know you've got to start with an introduction, that's kind of boring. But if you know there's a really good bit coming up that you're really excited about, why wait? At the end of the day, you're going to have the same product, but you write it when you're excited and inspired, and that's going to come through in your writing.
Yeah, so true. And I think sometimes looking at it like that, you know, I suffer quite severely with dyslexia. So you know, the thought of writing a book for me would be quite daunting for the similar reasons you just kind of touched upon, of, you know, that whole, unless it's going back to my uni years of my dissertation of, you know, it wasn't even that many words, but the thought of those words were the kind of the end point, the worrying point of the kind of outcome. But like you said, I think if I approached it in similar ways of what you were just saying about just writing a little bit that I'm excited about at a time, I think it probably wouldn't have felt so daunting and quite overwhelming. And, you know, that's a really kind of great tip and structure for people, you know.
But it's one that goes against everything that you're taught at school. You're taught to do everything in a really linear fashion. You start at the beginning and you go through to the end. And that's always felt weird for me. So, I mean, obviously, I don't read novels dipping in and out and then read the end first. That would be insane. But with non-fiction books, I do. I'll go, oh, this looks really interesting. I'll read that bit, and then I'll go back and read other things. So I can be a bit of a nightmare like that, because sometimes, why not read the fun things first? Why not write the fun things first? Life is short.
I really love that. And I think it's so true as well. Sometimes, you know, even when you, like you say, as a consumer, and the way you are in life is, you don't always have to do the boring things. And I know sometimes there are times where you have to just to kind of do it and get
Yeah.
it done. But you know, if you have the choice, definitely focus on the fun things you want to learn or the fun things you want to read. So that kind of leads me on to another question of kind of what's the process that someone may be thinking about writing a book might go through with you. I know you touched base on the planning process, but what's the process maybe once they've started up with the planning and they're starting writing the book, kind of what goes on from there?
Okay, so if someone comes and joins my program, it's 12 weeks and they can join at whichever stage they're at and they still get the same amount of time. So I've had authors come to me with 5 ideas and they don't know which one to go with.
Right.
And so we'll talk about that, and then I'll be able, quite more often than not, to say that third idea is the one you're really passionate about because your face lit up when you spoke about it, and then they kind of pick that. And then you go through, we kind of start with the end in mind. So writing a book isn't about writing a book, because most people write a book because they want to sell it, whether they want to sell 100 copies or 100,000 copies. You want to sell it. So you have to think about what that product looks like. How are you going to publish it? Are you going to self-publish? Are you going to traditionally publish? Who are you aiming for? And it's like in marketing, you need to know who your audience is. So we break down all that stuff as well. So you've got this idea of what the end product looks like. And then we start on what I refer to as the ridiculously detailed content page. And this will basically be your book in summary in about 15 pages. And I've had a bit of pushback from authors who were like, yeah, but I just want to start writing. It's like, but what are you going to write?
Mm-hmm.
Because without this plan, how do you know how things link together? How do you know that there is a thread going through the book, so people who are reading the book at the end go, oh, I love that. I like the way this happened, or I like the way that I got this out of it, or there's a reason for reading it. And you have to have that in your mind from the beginning. So we go through that process. And once the planning started, then we look at the realities of writing. And one of the daunting things people think is when you're writing a book, it's all about time and that you've got to sit down for 8 hours a day or a full day at the weekend and write. No one does that. Even Stephen King only writes in the morning. In the afternoon, he does other stuff. So other stuff related to books, but he only writes for half a day because your brain can't cope with that level of focus. And some of the authors I've worked with, realistically, they can work on their book for 2 hours a week. And they're like, oh, it's not very much. It's like, yeah, but we know how much you write in an hour. We know how many words you want to write. This is how many weeks it will take you. So we have a plan. So they know that within 6 months or a year or whatever, they know exactly when the book should be finished if they stick to the plan. So we work on that kind of it's all very planning oriented. I love lists. And when it comes to the writing, a lot of first time authors, they're a little bit unsure. So there's a lack of confidence. There's definitely imposter syndrome. So part of the program is anything you're working on, you send to me during that time. And I will go through it, not proofreading and editing, but looking at it and saying, this needs to be expanded. This is completely irrelevant to what this book is supposed to be doing. You need more information here. A case study here would be great. So they get an idea of how much information they need to put in or whether they need to pare it back, because you don't want every piece of research you've ever written dumped into a book. It's all got to be relevant. And then also throughout the program, depending on what the book is about and the issues that come up, we cover things like copyright of images, copyright of videos if you're doing links to videos and whether you should be doing links to videos. I had discussions about libel. I've had discussions about the difference between using primary and secondary sources, because not a lot of first-time writers necessarily know what the difference is. So, for example, if you've got a transcript of a court case, that's as primary as you'll get, so it's original from the court. But if you've got someone who's interpreted that, even if they're a police officer, that's now secondary because there's bias and interpretation put on top of it. So going back to primary sources is always a good idea if that's the kind of book you're writing. So because the program is bespoke, 100% one-to-one, it's about the book that author is writing. So it's very difficult to say we cover this, 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 and this, because what's the point of doing picture copyright if they don't have any pictures?
No,
So it's, yeah, so, and sometimes things come up that I don't even think about. So an author recently had linked to a YouTube video, and he was had an exercise in the book that related to that video, and you kind of needed to watch the video. And I pointed out the person who uploaded the video didn't actually have the copyright. The copyright was the BBC.
Right.
So linking to an illegally uploaded version of this video isn't a good look for a start. But also at any point the BBC could get that removed, at which point the link in your book no longer works.
Yeah, of course.
And so, and it's not something I'd thought about, but it's something that came up and needed to be discussed and explain some of the legal implications behind it. So that's not necessarily the fun bit of of writing books, but it's the important bits of writing books, because once things are published, you really don't want those emails or letters arriving saying this is a copyright infringement, because the fines can be astronomical and you have no choice but to pay them. So those things do come up. But what a lot of my authors find as they're going through the program is they start just with this very fluffy idea. You know, it's kind of there. They got a rough idea of what it's going to be like. By the time we've got the plan done, they can see a book. They can see a finished product. Once they start writing and they realize they can do it, then their brain starts working and they're looking at things in a very holistic way. So they'll see something like, oh, that'd be great for chapter 12 or whatever. So they begin to think like authors, normally before a month or 6 weeks is up on the course. So that's always quite nice to see that transition. And then I would say 50% of the authors that have gone through it have 8 weeks into the course have started getting ideas for the second and third book.
Wow.
And it's like, I've created monsters, because they're like, oh, I really like this idea, but it doesn't fit into this book, but it will be great for book 2. It's like, let's concentrate on book 1 for now. But I think that's great. Once you get into that author mindset, it's not to say things like imposter syndrome don't still come up, but it's knowing the process of writing, because it is as simple as sitting down and writing, but it's sometimes easier if someone says, if you do it like this, it will be a smoother ride. And then the third part of the program, if authors decide they want to go down the traditional publishing route, which is where my experience is, we'll work through the process of sending proposals to publishers, because with nonfiction, you don't need a completed manuscript. So we'll look at how to write a proposal, the type of things you put in there, the type of publishers you should choose, whether that publisher is right for you. And that in itself can be quite complex, especially if it's quite a niche book, trying to find that publisher. And having guidance with that is really helpful. When I was going through all of my publication issues sort of throughout my career, I've never had any help. It's all stuff I've learned whilst going through the processes and making mistakes and burning a few bridges along the way, kind of thing. But having that guidance, I think, is invaluable, because you only have one shot with any publisher, because if they turn you down, you can't say, well, actually, I've tweaked it, does this make it better? Unless they've asked you to do that, which they don't often. They'll just give you a no, or they won't respond. So that's another thing we look at. If, however, an author wants to do self-published, it's not something I do, but I can guide them as to the things they need to think about, some of the legal issues with self-publishing, not just ISBNs, but also the fact that your books have to be lodged legally in certain institutions around the UK. So there's various things like that. And I can recommend self-publishing routes they can go. But it's not something I do myself. So I do tell my authors that by the end of the 12 weeks, unless you are writing for 8 hours a day, you are not going to have a finished book, but you'll have enough that you've got the confidence to get on with it kind of once the program's finished. And every single one has kept me updated on what's going on, going, oh, I've written 50,000 words now of my 70,000 word book. And then it's like, oh, I finished, I'm doing the first edit. And I get all these little excited emails. And
that's lovely.
When they get a publisher who's interested, those emails are very exciting.
That's lovely. And just to kind of finish up today with the chat, you know, I know you're obviously a member of Senior Bounds, so all of your details are on the website at the bottom of the screen there. But how can people maybe get in touch or maybe ask some questions, or, you know, kind of contact you about this program? How can they do that?
Okay, so I've got my profile on See No Bounds. I also have my website, which has all the details, which is popplservices.com. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram, so I'm kind of all over the place.
Love that.
So I'm easy to get in contact with.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So guys, if you do watch this on a replay or when we do little snippets or anything like that, and you comment in the chat bar, or if we're sharing it wide and far and you're watching it not live today, not a problem. Pop your comments in chat bar. I can direct you straight to Charlotte. If you're more independent and you want to pop over to the Senior Bounds website, again, you can get in touch with Charlotte as easy as that, just by connecting with her through there, or as she mentioned, on her website. But a massive thank you, Charlotte, for being our guest today. You are obviously very knowledgeable about writing books, bringing the fun back to books, the planning, the procedure, and most importantly, you know, allowing those people to have that most lovable book in their hands at some point in the future. So thank you so much for being our guest today. It's been lovely to have you.
It's been lovely to be here, so thank you for inviting me.
No worries.
And I love talking about books, so
I love that. No, it's always so nice to hear about different people's kind of passions, and most importantly, encouraging other people. You know, if there's that little thought process in their brain that thinks, I want to write a book, I just don't know where to start, then, you know, get in touch with Charlotte, because I'm sure she'll be a really great person to help and support you guiding through that process. So a massive thank you again, Charlotte. Just want to say to everyone else, thank you for tuning in or watching this on a replay. If you're watching it back, feel free to comment in the chat bar if you have any questions. I will see you guys next week with another special guest. And Charlotte, I'm sure, will be back soon and involved in the Senior Bounds community on other live shows, so keep an eye out for her. So a massive good night to those of you in the UK, and speak to you all soon. Bye, everyone.